In the spring of 1834, somewhere in the rolling hills of central Virginia, a discovery was made. It would forever change how we understand the depths of human evil. 47 children, from 6 to 16 years old, were found chained in a basement under what looked like a normal farmhouse. The children did not look alike, spoke different languages, and when asked questions, could only whisper one name through their tears: Mother Sullivan. A local sheriff's report, hidden for over a century, described scenes so disturbing that 3 of the investigating officers quit their jobs within a week. What makes this case truly haunting is not just the horror of what was found, but the chilling fact that Constance Sullivan had been running her twisted operation for over 20 years without anyone finding out. The children called her Mother, but the truth behind that name was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue with the story of the Sullivan family and their terrible secrets, I want to ask you something important. This channel isn't for everyone. Only for the bravest people who dare to look at the darkest chapters of American history. If you made it this far, you're not like most people. You understand that some truths are too horrifying to ignore, no matter how disturbing they are. So, hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? Are you brave enough to hear stories like this from your own backyard? The question that haunted investigators then, and still puzzles historians today, is how such a massive operation could have gone unseen for so long in a small, close-knit rural community. Virginia in 1834 was a place caught between two worlds. The old plantation system was still strong, while whispers of industrial change came from the north. In this setting, the small farming community of Millbrook, about 50 families spread across the gentle slopes of Henrico County, was a typical American rural settlement. Most people farmed tobacco or corn, traded at Henderson's general store, and gathered for events at the one-room schoolhouse that also served as a community hall. The Sullivan property was on the edge of this community. It was a modest 2-story wooden farmhouse with nearly 200 acres of good farmland. To anyone passing by on the dusty road to Richmond, the Sullivan farm looked completely ordinary. The house was built in a common style from the 1810s, with white painted siding and a wraparound porch. A red barn stood behind the house, with a chicken coop and a smokehouse. But what made the Sullivan property unique wasn't visible from the road. Ezra Sullivan had bought the land in 1809 with money from his father's tobacco fortune. He spent a lot of effort expanding the house's basement. While most Virginia homes then had simple root cellars, the Sullivan basement stretched far beyond the house above it. Local workers remembered being hired for digging projects in the 1810s and 1820s, though none saw the finished work. Ezra paid well in cash and asked workers to focus only on their small section, not the whole project. Constance Sullivan, Ezra's wife, came to Millbrook in 1811 as a 22-year-old bride. Neighbors remembered her as a handsome woman with dark hair and an unusually soft voice. She dressed simply but neatly, went to Methodist church when she could, and had a reputation for charity. When asked about helping community causes, Constance would say that she and Ezra were already caring for several orphan children from her family in Pennsylvania. She said it was temporary, until permanent homes could be found. This explanation satisfied the community's curiosity about the occasional glimpses of children on the Sullivan property. Mrs. Henderson at the general store sometimes saw a young face peeking from the Sullivan wagon when Constance came for supplies. The children never spoke. Constance would explain they were shy and traumatized from losing their parents. The community, used to the tragedy of orphans in a time of high death rates, accepted this without question. Thomas Henderson, who ran the store, later said Constance Sullivan was one of his most reliable customers. Every 2 weeks, she came with a detailed list and enough cash to buy large amounts of basic food: flour, cornmeal, salt, pork, molasses, and other staples. The amounts seemed large for a childless couple, but when Thomas mentioned it, Constance reminded him about the orphans. She also bought unusual amounts of basic medicines, saying children from poor backgrounds often arrived sick. The Sullivan farm operated on a schedule that puzzled neighbors. While most farm families worked from sunup to sundown, activity at the Sullivan place often went late into the night. Lights were seen in windows at odd hours, and sounds of hammering or construction sometimes echoed at night. When asked, Ezra said he was making improvements for the growing number of children. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the traveling doctor for the Millbrook area, remembered being called to the Sullivan farm several times in the 1820s and early 1830s. Each time, he was told an orphan child was sick, but Dr. Whitfield was never allowed to see the children. Constance would describe symptoms and ask for specific medicines. When the doctor insisted on seeing the patients, Constance said the children were too frightened of strangers. The trick was so complete that even the local pastor, Reverend Samuel Matthews, believed in the Sullivan charity. During his visits, he praised them for their Christian compassion. He offered to help find permanent homes, but Constance always said she was writing to relatives in Pennsylvania who would eventually take the children. It just required patience, she said. What no one in the community realized was that Constance Sullivan had been perfecting her lie for over 20 years. The orphan children were not waiting for loving families. They were prisoners bought, kidnapped, or tricked from their families across many states, held in conditions that would horrify anyone. The discovery began with a few unrelated incidents in early 1834. February was unusually cold. On February 23rd, a traveling merchant named Jacob Stern was caught in a snowstorm and forced to seek shelter at the Sullivan farm. Ezra was reluctant, but couldn't refuse. Stern later described a tense evening. Constance served a simple meal, but the Sullivans seemed nervous. When Stern asked about the children, Constance said they were all sick and sleeping. What disturbed Stern most was the sound at night, muffled crying from under the floor. Ezra said it was the wind. Stern accepted this, but something felt wrong. The second incident was on March 15th. A young Irish immigrant named Mary Catherine Flynn got separated from her family and went to the Sullivan farm for help. Constance took her in. Mary Catherine was never seen alive again. Her family reported her missing, but a search found nothing. She was presumed dead from exposure or wild animals. The final incident was on April 2nd, 1834. A local farmer named William Hutchinson was hunting near the Sullivan property when he heard children screaming. Not playing, but screams of pure terror. He hid and watched for nearly an hour. The screams seemed to come from under the house. He saw Ezra come out of the cellar door, look around nervously, and go back underground. When Hutchinson told his neighbors, some thought the orphans might just need discipline. Others began remembering odd details. The large food purchases, strange night sounds, that no orphans were ever seen in town. Sheriff Benjamin Crawford, a veteran lawman, first dismissed it as gossip. But when Hutchinson made a formal complaint, Crawford agreed to investigate. On the morning of April 8th, 1834, Sheriff Crawford and his deputy Marcus Webb rode to the Sullivan farm. Constance met them calmly, invited them in for coffee, and expressed concern about the gossip. She showed letters from Pennsylvania relatives and offered to arrange a meeting with the children once they recovered. Everything seemed normal until Deputy Webb asked to use the outhouse. Outside, Webb saw a cellar door secured with 3 padlocks and heavy chains. The wood around the locks was clawed, as if someone had tried to scratch out. Webb told the sheriff. Both knew it was serious. Crawford asked Constance to show them the cellar. Her manner changed instantly. She turned pale, her hands shook, and she stammered that it was dangerous, just old storage. Then they heard it, children crying and a weak voice calling for help, muffled but clear, coming from under the kitchen. When they forced open the cellar door, a stench overwhelmed them. Human waste, unwashed bodies, and what Crawford later called the smell of despair. The basement Ezra had built for over 20 years was a calculated prison. The main room was large, with stone walls to muffle sound. Children, aged about 6 to 16, were chained to iron rings in the walls. They were skinny, in rags, sick from living damp and underground. After the first cries, they fell silent, staring with hopeless eyes. Deputy Webb, a father, left twice to vomit. Sheriff Crawford couldn't process the scale of it. In smaller rooms, They found punishment devices, medical area, and detailed records. The records showed the operation's scope. Children had arrived regularly since 1812. Some were bought from poorhouses, some were runaways, some were kidnapped. Over 90 children had passed through. In a separate chamber, through a narrow tunnel, they found the remains of at least 36 children in shallow graves under the floor. The investigation lasted months. Constance Sullivan's genius for deception was revealed. She created the perfect persona, a charitable woman caring for orphans. The story of traumatized children explained why they were never seen. The claim of finding homes with distant relatives explained why they never left. Children were taught to call her mother. If seen, they were told to act shy, not terrified. Large food purchases were for the children. Medical supplies were for their poor health. The basement construction was done by different workers over years, so no one saw the full plan. Soundproofing worked well. The children were psychologically controlled, told they were abandoned, that the outside world was dangerous. Good behavior got slightly better treatment. Trouble brought punishment seen by others. Most eventually accepted their captivity. The community was shocked. Many refused to believe the quiet woman they knew for 20 years could do this. But evidence was overwhelming. Records included letters with criminal contacts in other states. Constance Sullivan was part of a network that bought and sold children from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Sheriff Crawford found letters in a simple code discussing merchandise. One letter from H. Blackwood in Charleston, South Carolina, described wanted children like livestock. Henry Blackwood was a wealthy plantation owner buying children for sinister purposes. Dr. Whitfield became a key witness. Constance had detailed medical knowledge for keeping neglected children alive and asked for drugs to control them. Store records showed her growing purchases. Ezra Sullivan was the enforcer, carrying out punishments and refining the prison. Records showed some children were sent to other locations. Others, marked problematic, matched the bodies found. The investigation grew. Federal marshals got involved, unprecedented for the time. Survivors began to tell stories. New arrivals were broken by isolation and punishment. An internal hierarchy gave older children small privileges for controlling younger ones. Constance convinced many they were worthless and deserved this. Methods for getting victims included bribing officials at orphanages and using criminals in cities to find children no one would miss. The operation was expanding, with plans for more facilities. A breakthrough came from a 14-year-old survivor named Rebecca, kidnapped in 1829. She remembered everything, including conversations between Constance and visitors. She described a well-dressed man, Henry Blackwood, who inspected children like livestock 2 weeks before the discovery. His letter, found in Constance's papers, requested specific types of children. Blackwood's connection revealed a new horror. Plantation owners used the network to get workers with no legal protections. These children could be worked to death, used for medical experiments, or for violent entertainment, with no consequences. As the network was exposed, investigators faced resistance. Powerful families threatened them. Sheriff Crawford got warning letters. Deputy Webb was attacked. Dr. Whitfield's practice was boycotted. A key child witness disappeared. Despite this, the investigation continued with federal protection. Then Constance Sullivan was found dead in her jail cell. Officially a suicide, but it was suspicious. She was about to testify on the full network. Her death removed the most important witness. Just as it seemed the investigation might fail, a former Blackwood overseer named Samuel Pierce came forward, driven by guilt. He had documents and witnessed the fate of children sold to plantations. His testimony was one of the most disturbing in American legal history. He described Blackwood's experimental quarters, where children were used for medical experiments to test human endurance and diseases. Records showed 37 Sullivan children were sold to Blackwood. Only 4 survived. The rest died and were buried in unmarked graves. Pierce told of a demonstration in fall 1833 where buyers examined children like at a livestock auction. Pierce's information led to coordinated raids across the South. Over 100 more children were rescued. Henry Blackwood, two doctors from Charleston Medical College, and a Georgia legislator were among those arrested. Evidence showed the network operated for over 30 years, involved dozens of people, and victimized hundreds of children. Medical experiments included deliberately infecting children, testing poisons, and surgery without anesthesia. Corruption reached orphanages, local governments, judges, and law enforcement. Legal proceedings dragged on for years. Wealthy defendants used connections to escape justice. But the case led to the first federal laws against child trafficking, reforms in orphanage oversight, and new protections for children. Ezra Sullivan was convicted of kidnapping, imprisonment, and murder. He was hanged in 1836. Henry Blackwood was convicted of murder but died in prison in 1841. The two doctors got long prison terms and were expelled from medicine. Many powerful people escaped, fleeing to Europe or using political ties. Constance Sullivan had made over $12,000, worth hundreds of thousands today. Much was never found. The Sullivan farm was seized, but no one wanted it. The house was torn down in 1845. The basement was filled with concrete. A small cemetery was made for the children, though most names were unknown. The case changed America. Virginia passed the first comprehensive child protection laws. Other states followed. New federal laws addressed interstate crime. Public awareness grew about children's vulnerability. The phrase "another Sullivan case" became a warning. Dr. Whitfield dedicated his life to child welfare clinics. Sheriff Crawford became a federal marshal specializing in crimes against children. Survivors like Rebecca built lives, but carried scars. Some never recovered. The community of Millbrook struggled with guilt for missing the signs. The case became a lesson on vigilance, courage, and compassion. The Sullivan case remains a testament to both human evil and the power of individual conscience to expose and stop exploitation. If this story gave you chills, you understand why these dark chapters must never be forgotten. Evil often hides behind respectability. Share this video, hit like, and subscribe for more mysteries from America's past. What do you think? Was everything revealed, or are secrets still buried in the Virginia hills? Comment below. See you in the next video.